Behind all authority lies mere authorship. What is law? What is literature? What is scripture? How are these things different from a blog? How are these things different from something that somebody said on Twitter? The people who wrote the Bible were people. Everything they learned, everything they knew, they had figured out probably within 10 years of writing it down. There is at most one human lifetime of experience and wisdom written into any given page or any given paragraph of the Bible, of the ancient Buddhist texts, of the ancient Hindu texts, of the ancient Chinese texts. You cannot allow their ancientness, you cannot allow their mere textuality to make you think that they represent a higher standard of authority than any other kind of authorship. Ovid, ancient Latin poet. What did Ovid know about sex that you don't know? What did Ovid know about marriage? How to make a marriage work? Well, of course he knew something. But your next door neighbor knows something. I think my next door neighbor is quite an interesting guy. I actually really wonder what my next door neighbor thinks about my love life. He's an indirect witness to quite a bit of it over the last few years. I respect his opinion. I'd be interested to know, okay? But I can't really look up to the author of an ancient poem written in Latin, or written in Sanskrit, or written in Pali, or written in Chinese. I can't look up to them as an authority on romance, on love, on sexuality, any more than I can look to you in the audience, or you can look to me, all right? Behind all authority is mere authorship. However, if you look at an ancient text anthropologically, okay, this person knew something about what it was like to live in a slavery-dominated society that I don't know. Okay, now we're talking about something they really know that you and I don't know. Okay, this person knew what it was like to live in a world where the vast majority of people did not understand what the sun is, what the moon is, where babies come from, where the level of just ignorance of fundamental assumptions about science, where people, some people think the sun is no larger in the sky than it appears if you were to put your fingers into the heaven and hold it. They think it's the size of a silver dollar. What do you want to say? Where there are fundamental misconceptions about the world we live in, where there are fundamental supernatural misconceptions that dominate the world around them. If you're talking about texts from ancient India, then you're talking about remnants of a society that had a kind of racism that we don't have today, that we can't understand. So yeah, anthropologically, when you read a text by an ancient author, you are learning from the experience of someone who really does know something that you don't know. However, you're not going to learn anything by believing in it. You're not going to learn anything through reverence for the author as some kind of authority, as someone who holds the key to a lock in your life, as someone who knows the solution to a riddle in the modern world that you haven't yet or cannot solve. I had a viewer write into me and say, quote, well, he has had quite a philosophical journey in the past few years. He started off by becoming vegan, then got involved with antinatalism, wild animal suffering, pessimism, religion, and ultimately Buddhism. He has been reading the Pali Canon and says, quote, it's the most profound thing he's ever read. The fact that it's the most profound thing that you have ever read doesn't mean much. What if the poetry of Ovid is the most profound thing I've ever read about human sexuality? What if I grew up listening to rap music and then I make a shift from rap music, the literature of rap music, to the literature of ancient Rome, okay? The average of 2 wrong answers is still wrong. All right, yeah, rap music probably is a negative influence on my idea about gender roles and romance and sexuality. Guess what? Ancient Greece and ancient Rome, I could get an even more warped view of sexuality, okay? I'm going to be honest with you. The Pali Canon is not profound. Politically, were the authors of the Pali Canon sophisticated people? Politically, is the Pali Canon more profound than what you can read even from ancient China, let alone ancient Athens, ancient Rome? There's more to life than just politics and sex. Not much. Life is mostly politics and sex, I'll agree with you. But when you narrow it down this way, when you talk about human experience with politics and human experience with sexuality, now we can kind of gauge, we can kind of evaluate the sophistication and intelligence of the authors. So in what sense is the Pali Canon the most profound thing you've ever read? Maybe it's just the mystique you're responding to here. Maybe it's just that it's the most mystifying thing you've ever read. Maybe it's just that you find it harder to understand, prima facie at first glance, than Shakespeare, than philosophy written by and for Western Europeans, than sources that are available from other parts of the ancient world. The fact that something is mysterious to you does not mean that it was mysterious more than 2,000 years ago in India. When it was read by people who could understand it as more or less their first language. They could either read Pali or they were familiar with an adjacent Prakritic language that was very close to Pali. Okay, the fact that a parable about a monkey and an elephant in the jungle, a parable about exotic birds in the jungles of India and so on, the fact that that has a certain kind of mystique to you that a parable about a wolf in the forest of Western Europe does not, in no way does this suggest that the actual philosophical content of what you're reading is more profound or more useful. And again, if we just narrow the focus and talk about politics, what did these people know that you don't know? What is it they have to teach you about politics? What is it they have to teach you about sex? What do you think these people in ancient India knew about sex and marriage and so on, and love and happiness that you don't know? Probably the guys recording rap songs have a lot more wisdom to share with you that would actually be helpful in your life, probably about either topic. Rap music at least addresses police corruption, I would say. All right. His email goes on. I've never been a religious person, but I'm afraid I'm turning into a true believer of Buddhism. I'm a very skeptical person. I don't believe in God and never have. I don't believe in praying and rituals, and I'm also skeptical of meditation. But, he says, the idea of reincarnating after death as an animal or some other being has really taken him over. Taken over his thoughts, taken over his mind, taken over his dreams or fantasies. Okay? Isn't it interesting how many religions, including Islam in our time, hinge on making promises, the fulfillment of which is merely that you have to die? Isn't it easy to promise someone a better sex life in heaven after they are dead? Which is exactly what Islam does, rather than promising them a better sex life here on earth. Isn't it easy to promise utopia, a better society, a better political arrangement, if you like, more freedom, more power for you after you're dead, rather than in this lifetime here on earth? I appreciate that you are saying that you're skeptical, but you're not. If you are just reading the primary source text of ancient Buddhism, the Pali Canon and so on, what you will have noticed is that it is telling you again and again and again There is no soul. There is nothing that is reincarnated from one life to the next. There isn't a sort of escape capsule, like a life raft that escapes the sinking ship of your body and goes from one body to the next. There are only actions and consequences. In fact, the ancient primary source texts themselves contain the most skeptical condemnation of the modern idea of reincarnation imaginable. Okay? What they always retreat to is the skeptical claim, or pseudo-skeptical claim, that all that you can preach with certainty is that good actions lead to good results, good outcomes, whereas evil actions lead to evil results and outcomes. And they openly, nakedly admit that this is a kind of social engineering, that this is what is beneficial for the hoi polloi to believe, that the average person in society should believe in karma, should believe in doing good deeds, and that doing good deeds will bring about good outcomes. But we're also told again and again that the cognoscenti, highly educated people like you and I, we know that really what Buddhism is about is nirvana, which is to say the cutting off of this cycle of karma and reincarnation. Okay? Now, in what sense is it cut off? I do think that with a nudge and a wink, the texts are telling you again and again and again, people like you and I, dear reader, the intellectual elite within Buddhism, even within the first century of Buddhism, when these texts were largely being written and written down, the doctrine of karma and reincarnation, it's not for people like you and I. It's for the kind of people who read Jataka fables and tell their children and grandchildren about this one time the Buddha was reincarnated as a monkey that made a bridge between two trees while the forest was on fire. There is a very naked and direct elitism in Buddhism, intellectual elitism, sometimes expressed in the tradition of Satyadvaya or Satyadvaya, whatever you want to say, Pali and Sanskrit. The idea that there are two truths. There is one truth for the intellectual elite, and there is another truth for the hoi polloi, for the unwashed masses, for frankly illiterate people who have to cling to legendary fables about this life, about the afterlife, about reincarnation. In contrast to which, the nihilists among us, those who can read and really understand the Pali Canon, and a few authors like Nagarjuna, we can instead have the recklessly nihilistic view that at the end of this life, we are going to be snuffed out like a flame with no remainder. Or you could say we leave this body behind like a burnt wick after the flame goes out, and there is really nothing to carry on into the next life, into the next incarnation. So that is the sort of cynical trick that the audience is being presented with again and again in the Pali Canon. So it's extraordinary to have a 25-year-old English-speaking, presumably white Western person, this person doesn't mention their ethnicity, write into me saying that they consider themselves skeptical because they don't believe in the prayer, they don't believe in the blessings, they don't believe in the supernatural elements, but what they do believe in is reincarnation. When the Pali Canon is telling you again and again and again about the meaninglessness of reincarnation, the meaninglessness of having sons and daughters, of having children, the falsity, not just the meaningless, but that it's totally false, it's totally misleading to believe in a continuity of reincarnation from father to son, or sometimes continuity of any kind at all, such as, crucially, the idea of the continuity of the soul, that your same soul will be born in a new body. So it's remarkable to have someone writing to me saying that they are skeptical of Buddhism when they are not even skeptical of the very thing that the Buddha himself was skeptical of and that he was preaching and teaching his followers to be skeptical of as well. Come back to the major leitmotif of this video, come back to my main point. Behind all authority, there is mere authorship. When I was studying the Cree and Ojibwe, these are indigenous people who existed in Canada, the United States, before Europeans came over, before people came from Europe and conquered them. Do you think I looked up to the authors of the very few extant texts, what had been written down by Cree and Ojibwe people, as if they contained sacred wisdom, things I could never possibly understand or never learn from my own experience in life. The way that, no offense, this author, the guy who sent me this email, the way that this 25-year-old evidently, uncritically regards the authors of the Pali Canon. Well, I'll tell you something. It's really interesting to read the perspective of a warrior who had worked as a mercenary fighting in a French army against English colonists. It's really interesting to read the perspective of someone who lived through 50 years of slow motion genocide against his own people. It sure is interesting to reach out and touch that history. Now, Melissa, you've read Frederick Douglass, for example. I have read quite a few slave narratives, so like the written biographies or autobiographies of slaves, black African slaves, North America, South America, or the Caribbean. I have not read Frederick Douglass. You cannot possibly read Frederick Douglass and his experience as if he is God, as if he is Jesus, as if he is the Buddha, as if he knows something you can never know. But on the other hand, when you look at it kind of anthropologically, when you look at it as political history, of course, there's something incredibly valuable in recognizing these are the historical conditions this guy lived in. These are the political conditions he struggled with and struggled against. Of course, he knows so many things you and I can never know. There's so much we can learn from his experience. And when you are in effect reading the autobiography of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and the Pali Canon, okay, you are reading the unique experience of a man who rebelled against religion in his own time, who rebelled against his own family, who rebelled against his own father, who rebelled against his own caste, not just his own tribe, but who rebelled against the whole system of racism and slavery in society, and who fought very hard to propound his own philosophical and cosmological view in the world. It's a remarkable man with a remarkable life story that you can learn a lot from. But what you're learning is how to be an intellectual dissident in your own way in our times. The point of the Pali Canon is to transcend our times in order to transform our times, not to worship the superstitious horse shit of a bygone era in India.